Well, hello to everybody out there in Substack world. This is Scott Spradlin. I'm recording this video in the world headquarters for North Star Therapy, which is in Wichita, Kansas, also the home of Wichita DBT, and of course, the home of Wise Mind for the Distracted Mind, which is what we're here to talk about today. And you will see behind me my attempt to do a little bit of marketing. This is the background using the cover of our future workbook that will be released in July of 2026, the Dialectical Behavior Therapy Skills Workbook for adult ADHD. So, didn't get it all in there, but there it is. And then we're going to talk about that a little bit today because I'm doing a series of videos that are derived from, related to the content from the chapters. I don't want to give it all away. I want you to be able to read and use the workbook as needed. And I will say the workbook is something that would be very handy for therapists who may want an adjunctive tool in helping their adult ADHD clients mitigate those difficulties with mindfulness, emotion regulation, distress tolerance, and so on. And it will certainly be a helpful workbook in that it will help the general reader. And that would be, I'm both. I'm a clinician. I'm also an adult who is diagnosed with ADHD, as is Mariah, the co-author, my lovely wife and partner at North Star Therapy and Wichita DBT. And we know what that's like. So we think this is going to be a helpful tool for everybody. And we're looking forward to coming feedback and so on from professionals in the DBT world, folks in the ADHD world, our direct colleagues and connections, as well as our clients, patients, and others from the general public, because, we're open to feedback on, are we in line with accurate science? I hope so, that we're doing our best to do that. And if not, we'll consider feedback, or are we presenting the best that we can in terms of being true to DBT, as we also adapt and innovate a little bit to make DBT something that can be useful in targeting ADHD symptomatology. And so on. You get the idea. But this is part of community. We get feedback, and then we revise and we learn all that kind of thing. So appreciate your attention here. And thanks to everybody who's already pre-ordering the workbook from Amazon and from New Harbinger Publications. We're really excited about it. But this video, we're going to talk about what is ADHD and how does DBT help. So I'm going to try to keep this to less than 30 minutes. I chuckle because I can be quite loquacious. For example, being sidetracked now to tell you that I'm loquacious. So we're going to start out. I'm just going to read a few lines from chapter 1 in the workbook. This will be addressed to the adults out there who've been diagnosed with ADHD. I may have a sip of my willingness. Coffee. Because God wants us to pay attention. Also, we can be mindful with this, right? To help us be more alert. Okay. So my adult ADHD cohort out there. To you, I say, on behalf of myself, Mariah, we say, ADHD is not your fault. It's not a disorder of bad intentions or psychological code for laziness. And ADHD is not merely a kid's disorder or the sole domain of school-aged boys. ADHD is not simply a problem in paying attention, as though the primary issue is poor focus. ADHD is not a syndrome fabricated by pharmaceutical companies to help them sell medications. And ADHD is not a new problem, only emerging over the last 20 to 40 years. So let's discuss it. So this is where we get into, what is ADHD? What is it? At present, we'll say this, some of the prevailing ideas about adult ADHD, or ADHD in general, is that it is strictly a problem with attention or paying attention. We could have a whole other discussion, by the way, on the difficulty in articulating or defining what do we mean when we talk about attention. This is something that's talked about quite a bit. Just as we could do the same in terms of like, how do we just define emotions? In terms of how do we construct those? How do we construct that as a concept and, and define that in language. And we just have to do our best for now. That's what we're going to be doing. But presently, it is thought of as like, oh, this is a problem, not paying attention. And as other colleagues of ours have said, often ADHD among adults is often treated like a cocker spaniel of mental disorders. I don't say that to be disparaging toward other professionals, be that any mental health professional, medical professional, or otherwise. In part, that's due to a lack of scientific knowledge on the nearly 100 years old. Maybe I'm underdoing it. It might be over 100. But approximately 100 years of literature regarding what we now call ADHD available to us. And we can't all specialize in everything, right? But you know from your own experience that you do have difficulty paying attention. And you know that that's not the problem, because there are times you can pay attention. In fact, you do pay attention to things that you find eminently fascinating or interesting and so on. In more recent times, clinicians are more accurately articulating that ADHD is a neurobiologically based developmental delay across a constellation of executive functions, which we've talked about in other videos and content. And we reference works of Russell Barkley and Dr. Brown and Russell Ramsey. So your executive functions, EFs for short, but for the video, I'll say executive functions, are exactly what help you to act upon yourself, self-directing, self-regulating, organizing your actions toward achieving goals that you have for the moment, for the day, throughout the week, for your, you accumulate all those over time, so short, medium, and long-term goals. But our executive functions are what help us to do that. I wake up in the morning, executive functions get my feet on the floor, get me about moving around, and I begin to go through a sequence of activities. I don't know what your activities are. A lot of people get up, they go to the restroom, and then they maybe brush their teeth or wash their face, and then maybe they go make a cup of coffee or some tea. Maybe they exercise, but they begin to put their clothes out for work, or they're helping their kids get ready for school. All of these activities involve working memory, planful behavior, self-organization, being able to sustain the tasks that are initiated, and repeating those. And also being able to work upon the environment that each one of us inhabits in a way that environment helps us. So we can help our environment to help us. But we all have these executive, all of us are born with this constellation of executive functions. Now, as we understand it right now, ADHD is simply a nomenclature that we use to discuss these executive function problems. It's the nomenclature that we have. So until it changes, that's what we use. It has changed over time, right? But we'll talk about that later also. So with those impairments, then we're talking about executive function impairments. There is an impairment across those domains, which are fundamentally neurobiological, born within us. They're just part of the hardwiring as a human being, just as our emotions are. Fight and flight, it's hardwired into us. We know as babies and infants, we know to cry when we're hungry or fussy or something's wrong. How do we know that? It's wired into us. And then it prompts behavior to help us interact with a social world around us, right? And and then that social world is coming and responding to us, depending on how they respond to us, and what skills they bring, tender nurture, chaotic neglect, that begins to shape us. And so there's this interaction between social world, environment, relationships, and our neurobiology. And that's what we're going to look at. That's what we look at this workbook here is it's trying to really distill what we've come to learn from all of those forebearers in the research in science of ADHD and attentional issues and problems. And those clinicians out there, clinicians, researchers, sometimes they're wearing both hats and do both. And if we're standing on anything, it's on the shoulders of these giants and those who have done some very important and difficult and hard work along the way to help us understand what executive functions are. And what we've done, and I've mentioned it in other videos, is that we've pared this down. We've pared down the set of executive functions because, as I said, there are concepts in psychology that different theorists, they structure it differently. So there's a lot of variances in that. So we're going to keep it simple, and I'm going to try to do my best to stop straying off into those possibilities. So I'm going to do this. The 5 executive functions that we're going to look at in this workbook, I want for your consideration, that we want you to consider. It's very scaled down to make it practical. The first one is attention and focus. Attention. Secondly, we're going to look at inhibition and self-restraint, our ability to ignore distractions, including internal distractions of thoughts and popcorn ideas and so on, and also external distractions and noise that may misdirect us away from valued action that we intend to engage in, or perhaps over duties that we all have. Time management. Third one is time management or acting on and toward time. Is a language we picked up from Russell Barkley. Acting upon time. Acting upon time. Time management isn't just, I get a watch. I do have a watch. Thank you, wife. Very helpful, by the way. But we need more than clock and calendar. We're going to need some other adjunctive tools. We'll get to that later. So number four executive function area we're going to look at is working memory, which subsets both verbal and nonverbal. So working memory often has impairments that get in the way of our, again, initiating task or losing track of task, and I'm commenting. And then the fifth area we want to look at is emotion regulation. Emotion regulation is getting a lot more attention these days in the ADHD literature, has been for a while, but these days especially. And it makes a lot of sense. And there have been researchers looking at this at least from probably late 90s. Alexandra Philipson, for example, and her colleague Hesslinger from Germany have been looking at that in their literature. And those are two clinician researchers to whom we owe a debt of thanks for shaping some of the content that we bring here to this workbook. But all of those areas are in some way impaired. There's a misfunctioning in the neurobiology. So what we are referencing here too is already sort of bringing in how does ADHD help in a way. We're framing, from a DBT point of view, framing ADHD problems as a neurobiological and environmental dialectical problem. They cross-influence one another. What am I getting at here? It's like on the one hand, so in traditional DBT, we have the biosocial model. In this refining some approach, this is our particular approach to ADHD to say, well, yeah, it's biological, but it's not just that we maybe have a problem with a hyperactive amygdala, or maybe we have too much cortisol, not enough dopamine, but we have other neurobiological problems with the domains I just mentioned. And we're born with those deficits. They're there. And they're in some ways inconspicuous throughout part of childhood, but we'll get to that later. I'm about to go into some weeds I don't need to go into right now. So attention and focus, inhibition, self-restraint, acting on toward time, working memory, and emotion regulation, right? And let me just briefly say something about each of those real quick. So when it comes to attention and focus, that is your ability to activate and direct your attention in various forms of focus that are related to processes such as learning, regulating emotions, your social interactions, and task completion. So this is one that's most obviously built into the name, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, right? So, however, as many wrongly think, it is not only an impairment in attentional processes. With ADHD, impairments in attention manifest as difficulties with activation, meaning turning on the flashlight, language we borrow from our colleague Lydia Zylowska, as well as orienting the attention. Where do we put the beam once we turn it on? And reorienting that attention when we become aware that that attention has been broken. Along the lines of inhibition and self-restraint, this is our ability, again, to block out distractions in the environment as well as within ourselves so that we can continue toward particular tasks that we need to, even if it's just to make the first morning's cup of coffee, or to get the trash out to the curb, or to feed the dog or the cat. We could become distracted with certain thought. Even this morning, as of the recording of this video, Mariah was making soup in the kitchen. And she asked me to fetch a light bulb from downstairs because one of the kitchen light bulbs in our overhead light had burned out. I said, sure thing, I'll get that. And on the way out of the kitchen, I stopped it because I had a thought. I paused and I told her the thought. I don't remember what it is now. And she's like, okay, interesting. Okay. And then I'm like, okay, off I go. I go downstairs. I get into the laundry room / pantry area. And all of a sudden I realize I have no idea why I'm there. So my attention toward that activity, what happened was I didn't inhibit in that moment these, like these extraneous moment, this particular thought. I'm like, oh, I'm going to share that with her real quick. Then I'll go do the thing. Nope. I got down there. I didn't know what I was doing anymore. So this also reflects a problem with working memory. Both the verbal and nonverbal working memory were not active because I just went downstairs. I did not go downstairs with an image of myself fetching the light bulb or self-talk. I'm going to get the light bulb. I'm going to get the light bulb. I just went down there on automatic pilot. So I called upstairs, honey, what do you need? Why am I down here? And she chuckled kindly and said, a light bulb, please. So I brought her the light bulb. When it does come to acting on and toward time, this relates to your ability to connect goals and behaviors with both clock and calendar. And this is very important, period, especially in our particular modern day and age. We have deadlines for activities. We have deadlines for rent. We have deadlines to, say, be at work, projects we do at work, tasks we're supposed to carry out. If we're learning, if we're in, taking up college or vocational school, or, whether we work with our hands or we're working in information, we have lots and lots of deadlines that we're going to have to be attentive to. So the ADHD brain is vulnerable to what Russell Barkley calls time blindness. And this is a struggle that presents as being able to connecting time with tasks, losing track of time. And by the way, in advance, as was said in the introduction video, these are only explanatory statements explaining in part what happens with ADHD struggles. These are not excuses. So I hope you don't hear it that way, because a lot of times us ADHD adults, we hear this and kind of go, I don't know, it feels like I'm making excuses. And you're not. These are real problems, which means you have to take it seriously and address it with skills, which is what this workbook is all about, and what this Substack is all about, and what we're all about. So let's work on that together. Sometimes the impairment may also manifest in the overestimation of our ability to complete a task. We'll get into that, this idea of incautious optimism and how that's a problem, and not really taking time seriously. Time will run out. And so there's a saying we have, I don't know if I picked it up from somebody else or it's something I just came up with, but I'm going to hold on to it because it makes a lot of sense. Taking the old adage, oh man, we are when you're driving home perhaps on a long road trip, so close yet so far away. Or you're that senior in high school or college, right? It's like, oh, it's May, I graduate in a few weeks. Oh man, it's so close. But there's that subjective sense that it's a long ways away. With ADHD, a lot of life is, it's so far away yet so close. Because it looks like it's going to be far away. I will return that item to the store by the return deadline. I've got a whole week. It's Wednesday. I have time. I could do it today, but it's not due till next Friday, so I'll wait till then. I got time. But other things come up. You don't write it down, and then there you go. Not in your working memory too far away. all kinds of things working against you there. But that's also the time blindness. And working memory, this is how we use an inner voice, verbal working memory, talking to ourselves about, like, we talk about the task we're doing. Even, I have the ability to do it. I know what to do. I'm going to get the light bulb. I'll get the light bulb. Where are the light bulbs? This, okay. And take light bulb back to kitchen. Image in head. Me going downstairs. Me going into room. Me fetching light bulb. Me talk good one day. So this is our self-talk that helps us stay on task, and our like internal, in our mind's eye, seeing ourselves doing these activities in a way that help us to stay on task, including thinking through, do I have the pen and the paper for class? Do I have the recording device? Do I have gas in the car to go to my job or to go on the road trip? Do I have money in the bank to pay for bills or saving it for a home? So in the nonverbal realm, you have difficulty accessing and activating information from past events, and you will have a weak sense of the future. Terrible, right? This is what we glean from the science on ADHD, executive function impairments. And as goes, your inner voice is essential for reminding yourself of important rules, such as social norms or employment expectations. In individuals like us ADHD adults, with impaired verbal working memory, our internalized self-talk can be weak, and it may be barely audible. It could be a whisper, making it difficult to discern among the busy thoughts. Where do I put my attention? Where's my internal attention? Okay. As far as emotion regulation goes, this last one here, regulating your emotions is your ability to act on your emotions and your motivation. So you can control their duration and their intensity. This means you can either upregulate or you can downregulate them, kind of like when you're driving a car, right? I'm accelerating or I'm letting off the accelerator. Not only do I let off the accelerator, sometimes I kind of just let the car slow down. I may have to tap the brake or, gently push the brake, whatever work signals. And I'm looking at all the things around me. But as far as that goes, I think that's an apt metaphor for emotional regulation. We can upregulate, we can downregulate. Often when it comes to emotional regulation, many folks think it's all about how do I keep myself from getting into big, stormy, yucky, and chaotic emotions. It's only part of it. Emotional regulation is also about how do I act toward activities? How do I generate emotion to also work through procrastination or to overcome procrastination traps and so on. So there's loads of evidence out there that shows that ADHD adults struggle with regulating their emotions, and they have frequent bouts of dysphoria. And there's a lot of really great clinical literature out there that's really available for all of us. And this would be another indicator as to what would make DBT potentially useful for ADHD adults. Well, the crowning glory in the top would be mindfulness, of course, learning to pay attention on purpose. So this is a way to exercise one's, attentional processes within the brain and activating neural processes and so forth and activating prefrontal cortex activity, yada, yada, yada. And also to be able to, for anybody, even neurotypical folks, they have to act on their emotion. They generate emotion to get things going. And that means moving the body typically. There can be this internal process. Sure, there's part of it. It's all entwined. It's all interrelated. It's very dialectical. It's very, the whole is greater than some of its parts. And what happens for a lot of ADHD folks, we kind of get stuck in our head, like, oh, what do I do about it? Well, let me sit in this chair and think about it. And the thinking is not enough to change how that. But when we change our body's behavior, we can also influence our attentional processes and our emotional regulation. So there's lots of ways that ADHD impairs the quality of life, which I'm not going to go into here because we're already sitting at 24 minutes at this particular moment on the video. I do want to remind everybody that ADHD is not a Cocker Spaniel disorder. It's not the mascot of mental health disorders. There is a serious crisis among ADHD adults in this country and likely in other, Western nations also. What we found is, not we, I should say, Russell Barkley and his colleagues have collected data showing that ADHD adults tend to live somewhere around 15 years less than their neurotypical cohort. 15 years less for all kinds of various reasons. I will just give you a few, these are here in the workbook as kind of a checklist. Maybe you're familiar with some of these if you're an ADHD adult. But ADHD life struggles include things such as an increased risk for family conflict and distress. Okay, everybody has that, don't they? Sure. But more often so. Increased risk for marital discord or discord with a domestic partner. And the consequences of things going wrong in adult relationships is a heavier weight than things that go wrong with, teenage dating relationships, typically, because there may be children involved, there may be shared finances involved, a hope for a future, and so on. Tends to be an increased risk for substance use disorders, especially with alcohol and cannabis. Tend to be more moving violations with the operation of motor vehicles, as well as accidents. There's an increased risk of lifetime obesity, which then that tracks with early morbidity, and so on. So, doesn't sound too Cocker Spaniel like. These are very serious issues. ADHD, undiagnosed and unmitigated, can wreak hell and havoc on an ADHD adult's life. And that's one reason we wanted to get this book out there, get this workbook out to everybody, to help those with ADHD mitigate those impairments so they can work toward a life worth living. So, what is DBT and how can it help you with your ADHD? Well, I'm going to say this. We know giving credit where credit is due is very important. And so, of course, we acknowledge that it's been Marsha Linehan and her colleagues who developed dialectical behavior therapy, which is an effective therapy for treating persons who are chronically suicidal and who meet criteria for borderline personality disorder. That was the original set of outcomes of that. Fabulous, tremendous breakthrough, historic for psychological sciences and clinical work, and for those suffering with BPD, of course. And since the DBT had been established as an evidence-based therapy, other clinicians who practice practice DBT and who are trained in that and who are also researchers began to look at other problems that folks have, which have some similarities, overlap, if you will, to folks with BPD, particularly looking at those who have difficulty regulating emotions. And so since the establishment of DBT as an evidence-based therapy, we've seen the development of DBT for treating eating disorders, for treating substance use disorders, for becoming a integrated approach with treating post-traumatic stress disorder. Work with couples, all kinds of folks we could mention here. We don't have time because we're running out of time. Trying to stay mindful to the clock. I have other things to do today too, as do you. But it's been developed, and then those programs or those innovations, those applications, those developments have been researched, and some of those are still kind of in the early phases with a lot of promising data. Some of those have in turn had replicated data that shows that they do in fact work. Okay. So DBT is a skill-based approach that aims for change in behaviors and accepting people where they are at present and their need to change. DBT provides a structure, and it provides flexibility, and it has much to offer adults with ADHD. And we can start looking at the main DBT skills, of course, and how we can use those. Also, again, giving credit where credit is due. Something that's very important, at least to my knowledge, to our knowledge. Alexandra Philipson in Germany and her colleague Hesslinger were the earliest pioneers I'm aware of who looked at applying modified DBT for adult ADHD with some promising outcomes. And they've been doing a lot of work since then, at least going back into the early 2000s, way before I really even thought about this. I did on my own, certainly as an ADHD adult back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Oh yeah, I'm glad I'm learning mindfulness. I think I could use it. I think it helps me with my ADHD after I'd been diagnosed. But I didn't systematically try to work it out with, how do I really get these skills aimed at my executive function impairments. And I've had some pretty serious struggles. Wish I would have done that sooner for myself and not only my patients who did meet criteria for BPD and so on. So it's been probably over the last 15 years doing more of that work and then doing a deeper dive in the research and, of course, exploring anybody else doing this work. And they are. They're doing the work. So Philipson, Hesslinger, and some others in Europe, some American researchers and practitioners who found some good outcomes for their applications. They're all applying it in slightly different formats, still keeping with the dialectical model, mindfulness and basic skills, but some are going with just a group training, group skills training. Some are going with individual work, and some a combination. In our case, we do both. We have folks who are coming for individual DBT-informed individual work for ADHD. Then we have some folks that we find in co-assessing with the client. They come into the fully adherent DBT program, which we modify for them in particular and customize it to their executive function struggles. And it's in that program that they learn core mindfulness, which helps them to learn how to focus and how to develop awareness. And this will actually help strengthen their attentional processes and their ability to inhibit and be able to block out distractions and impulses perfectly. I mean, like 100% all the time? No, that's why we say mitigate. There's still room for fallibility. But we're not going to not work at mitigating it just because we don't get it 1,000%. Maybe a little exaggerating there, right? But it helps us to encode new information and access an inner clipboard. It'll probably help us work our working memory a little bit better and awareness of time and so forth. We have distress tolerance skills that can help us navigate the numerous ADHD crises that happen on a regular basis, which seem to emerge from emotional vulnerability and dysphoria and difficulty coming back to a baseline in this emotion. So what we need is we need skills to bring ourselves down ASAP. Not get into more thinking, but we need those skills, and distress tolerance helps us to learn how to bear pain skillfully. And that's a lot of what we do there. So there's a lot of work on willingness versus willfulness. There's a lot of work on learning how to practice radical acceptance of where one is. But also, how do I bring down the emotional storm? I act upon my body, set of skills there to help us to do that, and we learn how to practice radical acceptance. And this is a lifelong practice. With some very positive outcomes. Emotional regulation skills, these help you understand your emotions better. Like, what are they for? How do I build emotional resilience? How do I befriend my emotions? A whole chapter in here on how do I befriend my emotions. And how they're adaptive. Emotions are fundamentally adaptive. And of course, they can get a little wonky. And sometimes we do get into fight or flight or freeze, where we may be vulnerable to emotional dysregulation. And so understanding your emotions better will help you navigate that and to decrease the frequency of outright emotional dysregulation. And aiming your behaviors at your life worth living goals, because that's the bigger picture too. We also work on interpersonal effectiveness skills. So these skills will help you improve your organizational skills and inhibition around your relationships, which is what really matters the most for all of us, right? How do I have quality relationships? And how do I take responsibility for the way that my ADHD impacts my relationships, my promises that I make? What do I do when I don't have motivation to follow through on, or I realize I forgot and I didn't meet somebody, I didn't return the phone call, and so on. Important that you learn how to communicate accurately. You learn how to validate others, and you also learn how to advocate for yourself so that you can meet your needs and your wants in a wise way that's also encapsulated within your wise mind, and we'll talk more about that later, and your values for a life worth living. What are the ways in which you want to live in terms of, say, honesty, transparency, fairness, love and connection, all those sort of things. So that's what you'll be learning there. We're at 35 minutes on this particular video. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to have to do a part 2 on this one, a little bit more to it. I thank you for watching this, and in the meantime, I'm going to ask that you all stay warm, because as of this recording, it is February the 2nd, 2026. It's very cold in Kansas. It's warming up to the 60s next week, but I know a lot of us here in the U.S. anyway are getting pummeled by serious Arctic blasts. So I hope that you'll be warm, and you'll be loved, and you'll be well fed. Be mindful out there, and look for more to come. Thank you for watching.